This program is presented by Smart Bazaar.
So now I will talk about the takeover of Goa. The Portuguese conquered in 1510, and I will talk about some of the interesting aspects when Alfonso de Albuquerque conquered Goa. Vasco da Gama came to Kappad in Calicut on the 24th of May, 1498. So he arrives in Kappad with this big ship. Kappad is in Kerala, near Calicut. And now there's a problem. Somebody should go to the shore and check up what kind of a reception is awaiting. But there could be violence. Somebody could be killed. So Vasco da Gama's ship has about 150 people. And many of them are convicts from the jails in Lisbon. Because all these voyages took 6 months one way, at that time earlier even a year. And so half of the people would die. So people were not ready to go. Only very few adventurers were ready to go on such voyages. And there were a lot of convicts which were picked up from the jails and said, okay, you go. And for the convicts, it was an opportunity. Maybe they will die, but also if they don't die, they will become very rich. And so there were lots of convicts, and one of them was João Nunis. So João Nunis is asked by Vasco da Gama to go to the shore and check up what is happening. So João Nunis takes a small boat and goes to the shore of Kappad, and he meets two Tunisians on the shore. You know, people from all over the world is to come here, but not around the Cape of Good Hope. They came through the Red Sea. And the Tunisians asked João Nunis in Spanish, what the devil brings you here? And João Nunis answers, we come for pepper and we come for Christ. So these are the famous words of João Nunis. We come for pepper and we come for Christ. This, by the way, this desk is the one which traveled with Vasco da Gama to Kappad from Lisbon. So this desk is there in the Navigational Museum in Lisbon. This is the Archangel of San Rafael, which is also on Vasco da Gama's ship, and you can see it. And in that Navigational Museum, there is also a jar of pepper, which is recovered from a ship which sank in 1600. So you can also see this pepper, which is that old. So João Nunis. So I created a work in response to the story of João Nunis. This is called Pepper Cross. So I carved out pepper on a cross, and this is an old piece of boat with a cross. So this is called Pepper Cross. So my works, often history becomes a footnote to my works. This is Vasco da Gama, who meets the king of Calicut. And we know this king in all history textbooks of the world as Zamorin. But let me remind you that nobody called Zamorin ever existed. The name of this king was Samudra Raja, but the Portuguese could not pronounce it, so they called him Zamorin. So all the history textbooks don't write Samudra Raja, but they write Zamorin. But here, this is a very interesting painting which tells you about what we are also doing in Goa. Some of the habits which we have acquired date back to this painting. Now, this is on 24th of May. Now, those of you who are aware of the temperatures in Calicut in 24th of May, the king, Samudra Raja, is wearing the right attire because it's so hot. And poor Vasco da Gama is wearing a fur coat and he's wearing all this. And this you see when I go for Goan marriages in the month of April, May. The bridegroom and all the ones in three-piece suits sweat it out. This is what we acquired from Vasco da Gama's attire here. This is a work by Viraj Naik, one of the important artists of Goa, and this is called the Triumphant Trio. This is Alfonso de Albuquerque, and he was invited by Timaya and a few other merchants to come and to take over Goa. And they thought that they will be appointed as some kind of a subedars, and they will rule, and they will give some money to the Portuguese, but that never happened. The Portuguese stayed for 450 years. The port of Goa, Old Goa, was one of the most important ports. Not just the Portuguese made it bigger, but even before the Portuguese, the Kadambas controlled it, then the Vijayanagar controlled it, And this was a port which was a very prosperous port with ships from Arabia coming there, ships from the Coromandel coast coming there, Southeast Asia coming there. So it was a very important coast. And in 200 AD, we even had Roman ships coming, not maybe to Goa, or definitely because we have found Roman coins in Goa. If you go to the Pilar seminary, you can see Roman coins and Roman amphora pots. So trade-wise, we were connected with the world much before the Portuguese came. But when the Portuguese came, it became the center because the Portuguese took over the spice trade. And the spice trade was basically held by the Arabs. They had become immensely rich because of the spice trade. And when the Portuguese controlled the spice trade, they got rid of them because they came via the Cape of Good Hope, not through the Red Sea. And then they defeated the Egyptian fleet in Chaul. And so they had total control of Indian Ocean. They had total control of the Arabian Sea. And anybody doing any business in the Arabian Sea had to have a Portuguese cartaz, a license from the Portuguese. And Old Goa became a very, very prosperous port. I will just give you an idea how important it was. The population of Old Goa in 1560 was 2 lakhs. And the population of London that time was 40,000. So it was much bigger than London. And Old Goa was an important port. And now the bottled water is sold now. But bottled water used to be sold in Old Goa in 1560. That's because there were 2 lakhs people and there was not enough water. So they did not bottle it, they will sell, but water was sold. It was thickly populated, but there was no proper sanitation. So slowly disease came, many things happened. But Old Goa was a very, very important port. Horses were some of the most important material for trading after pepper. Pepper was, of course, the most important. The cost of pepper, if it was 10 rupees, if it was 1 rupee in Goa, it was 100 rupees in Europe. So it is 100 times. So those who are into business know that this is 10,000% profit. The profit is so much, that's why this whole enterprise of, there are 1,000 ships which were coming from Lisbon to Goa and back. It took 1 year, 6 months to come, 6 months to go. And the profits were huge. Horses were also very, very important. And horses came from home routes. And horses were allowed to be unloaded only in Goa. They were sold basically to Vijayanagar. And there are very interesting stories of the horse trade. Today we have hardly any horses in Goa. But we do have Khode as a surname here. Khode is a surname, perhaps those families dealt in horses. Vijayanagar had a very interesting contract with the Portuguese. They would say that sell us the horses, don't sell to the Bahamanis because they were in constant war. And then they would say, okay, we will pay you better price. Even the dead horses were paid for. Horses cannot sit down. So the horses were suspended in the ship from the ceiling with canvas suspensions, because when the storms came, otherwise they would be injured. So the horses were suspended. And another very interesting story I came across is grass was exported from Goa to Arabia for breeding horses. So it's like sending raw material and getting the finished product. And the horses, there were many horses which would die at sea. And so the tail of the dead horse was produced before the buyers. So the Vijayanagar buyers would see the tail of the 10 horses were dead, so 10 tails, and they would also pay for the dead horses. And there's a very interesting word which is called horse latitude. Now, horse latitude is many sick horses where sort of they would anyway die. And there is a certain latitude in North and South Hemisphere where there is no wind. And there's no, so the ships have to be moving with rowing. And it was very hard to row. And so the dying horses will be thrown off into the sea. And this latitude came to be called as horse latitude. I think there should be a large sculpture of a horse in Panjim in Goa in memory of this horse trade. I have created a lot of works here. This is a horseshoe I created in Goa Vella, a seahorse I created with shells. This is a horseshoe, and there's a word written on it in Arabic, and it's called El Khamsa. El Khamsa means the 5. It's a story from Quran. The prophet was fond of horses, and one day after the day's work, he commanded the horses to go and drink water in the oasis. The horses ran, and before they could touch the water, he blew his trumpet and said, come back. Only 5 horses obeyed. And the Arabs believe that these 5 horses are the ancestors of the great Arabian breed. And that's why El Khamsa. This is a carving on the Vittala temple in Hampi, where you see a Portuguese trader selling horses to the Vijayanagar king. Everybody talks about Atlantic slave trade, but in Goa, we had a huge slave trade, and Goa was the center of slave trade. In Old Goa, there's a place called the Sayaba, that is Adil Shah Square, it is called, and this was the main slave market. And slaves were actually 5 slaves could be bought for 1 horse. That was the price of slaves. They were also bought with cowrie, and most of the slaves were from Mozambique. They were caught in the villages, in the interiors of Mozambique, in connivance with the local people, local merchants, and they would be then brought by ships to Goa. So there were a lot of soldiers who were slaves in Portuguese army. This is a video from Portuguese army. There were advertisements of slaves available, and there was one family of Mamai Kamat. They were the dealers with slaves, and there are letters which they have, which are published, where there was a request from French East India Company asking for 200 slaves, children, women, and men. And one of the conditions was they should have already suffered from smallpox, because those days smallpox would kill, and so they wanted slaves who already suffered from smallpox. They were stamped on the ship, and the ships which were brought were called coffin ships, because you could get bad smell, bad odor almost 5 kilometers away. These are what the records say. And they were stamped. Then while they were carried from the villages to the port, there were forks put around their necks. I have created a work with cowrie shells and a fork, because they were bought with cowries. Cowrie shell is for about 3,000 cowrie shells you could buy a man or a woman. This is a painting of how they were stocked. They were considered as material. They were considered as goods. They were not considered as human beings. And there are very, horrible stories about the slave trade which exist. And then the Portuguese were richer only for about 100 years, from 1510 to about 1610 or so. 1640s or so. After that, they lost everything for the simple reason that the British, the Dutch, and the French came, and they lost everything with them, and the Portuguese became extremely poor. They could barely manage administration of Goa, and only about the tobacco trade was fully with them. So about 2 lakhs rupees from the tobacco trade was the profit which went to the Queen of Portugal. Rest of the money was spent on administration, and the salary of a Portuguese captain was equal to a British sergeant. So they became extremely poor. And so when they became poor, they didn't have the army. So the slaves escaped, and the slaves went to the jungles of Karnataka. I went and stayed with them. So there were about 25,000 Africans staying in Haliyal and areas near Dharwad in Karnataka. And they were the people, their ancestors escaped from Goa. They speak Konkani. When they went there, the locals were Hindus essentially. They were baptized on the ship itself when they were brought, so they're all Christians. But the names of these Siddhis, they call themselves, the names of these Siddhis are very interesting. They are Radha, Krishna, Vasudev, Ganpati, and all of them in the morning go to the church. It is beautiful. And I asked them to sing and dance. The only time you know that they are not really from here, they are different, is when they dance and they sing, because it's very, very African. This is the song they sang for me.
Kai barelo komlu muzo main makadillo kachaba yenete todo komodlo kumbia sho shore kumbia baba kumbia sho.
So these songs which you heard, which we sing in Goa, are 350 years old, because the ancestors of this Siddhis went from Goa. They were speaking Konkani, and we sing the same songs, and they sing these songs. They have had no connection with Goa later. And so these songs are basically about 350 years old. And the blacks, the Siddhis, call the other people straight-haired one. We have, because they all are curly heads, so others are called straight-haired one. And they do, I mean, now they have got voting rights and everything. But earlier, there was a problem which caste to put them in, because they were the darkest of the dark. And so it was a big issue. So I will talk a little bit of Inquisition. The court of Inquisition, people started converting. Conversion was happening with force. But then those who got converted would continue to practice their original religion. They would continue to pray to Rama and Krishna. And so a letter was written by St. Francis Xavier that we need a court of Inquisition. So Inquisition was basically directed towards the new converts who were not following the tenets of Christianity, so-called, properly. And so they were arrested and tried. And sometimes they were burnt alive in a ceremony called auto de fe. Now, how do we know all this? There is hardly any Portuguese record, official record, which exists. All records were destroyed, but we had a gentleman called Dillon. Dillon is a French doctor who came to Daman. He was just 30 years old, and he arrived in Daman, and he started having an affair with a lady who was a mistress of the governor. There was a governor of Daman who had an affair with a French lady who was a wife of a captain who was at sea. And Dillon was a better-looking man, younger man, so she fell for him. And the governor decided, I will teach him a lesson. So what did he do? He called the doctor to treat his son, who was a teenager. And those days, treatment essentially involved bleeding. They would just bleed the patient. And for bleeding, there was a little sculpture of St. Anthony tied to the boy's hand. And Dillon said, kindly remove it. They said, no, we can't remove it. He's going to protect him. He said, no, what nonsense. Let me do my procedure. Please remove it. This was taken as an insult to Christianity. He was arrested, sent to Goa, where he remained in prison for 2 years. And then he was tried and then taken to Lisbon. He went to Lisbon. Again, he was there in prison for some time. And there was something which was tried for, which was called a relapse of heretics. In the sense, he closed his eyes while listening to a sermon. He said, now you are again insulting the religion, so you will be tried again. But somehow, the Queen of Portugal had a French doctor who happened to be known to this guy, Dillon, and he, through some kind of a connections, he managed to be released. He got released on condition that he will never talk about it. So for 10 years, he did not write about it. But then after 10 years, he decided to write a book. And that is a book which we have, which how we know about what really happened during Inquisition. So Inquisition was a very horrible thing. And there were a lot of migrations which happened because of Inquisition. I will talk about the migrations, because the migrations in Goa happened because of, first because of conversions, then because of Inquisition, because a lot of Christians went to, for example, to Kerala and to Mangalore, to Karnataka. Why did they go? Because the Inquisition court has very interesting laws. They were the laws which were exactly opposite what the Hindus did. Hindus didn't. You shall not do, before the marriage, the bride has something which is called tel. So, you shall not do tel. Tel is applying oil to the bride. You shall not apply oil to the bride. So now the Christians had to find something, so they had to apply rose. So they started applying rose to the body of the bride. You should not cook the rice without salt, because the Hindus never added salt to rice. So the Inquisition said you should cook rice only with salt. Salt has to be added. So there were very funny rules. A.K. Priolkar, who is a scholar, a historian, who has made a very interesting list of these rules. So this is, the Inquisition was responsible for really a lot of tortures, one of the darkest period in the history of Christianity. This is the symbol of Inquisition. This is there is a table of Inquisition which exists in the Goa Museum, and the leg of that table is like this. So I made a sculpture of the leg of the Inquisition table. These are the processions which were called auto de fe, and the people were taken in the form of in a procession, and then those who were found guilty were burnt alive as a deterrent to the others, and those who had already died, their bones will be taken out from the grave, and the bones will be burnt. So Garcia Orta, who was one of the who wrote the book on botany, he was a Jewish person, and he was dead, but his bones were taken out from the grave and burnt. These were some of the dresses this was a dress which was worn when you were not getting a death sentence, and this is the dress which was worn if you were going to auto the fay. The portrait of the prisoner was painted on this dress, and the portrait of the prisoner, the one after he was burnt, was put in the grave. Yeah, this is Tulsi. There are a lot of customs, traditions which have come from one religion to the other. Now, even the Pope perhaps does not have a cross in front of his house, but in Goa, every Christian has a cross. And where does this come from? Earlier, the Hindus had the Tulsi, and when the Tulsi was removed, you had to have something there, so a cross was stuck there. So there were many, many things which have sort of entered from one religion to the other.
विकसित भारत 2047 एक ध्येय, एक सपन गोयचो फुडार बळकट करपाचो, भारत देश विकसित करपाचो. तुई भी ह्या मोहिमेन वांटेकार जा. गोयचो विकास घडोवपाक तुई आपले योगदान दी. आपल्यो आयडियाज वा सजेशन्स दिवपाक गोवा ऑनलायन पोर्टलाचेर वचून विजन डॉक्युमेंट तयार करपाक तुझे मोलादीक योगदान दी. विकसित भारत 2047.